Hello everyone, my name is Alina Jašina-Schäfer. I'm cultural anthropologist and a postdoctoral researcher working in a project called Soviet Ambivalences based in Oldenburg in Germany. And as Sadi already mentioned, alongside him I have followed the project for the past 2 years. But unlike Sadi, who provided us with the internal workings of the projects, the aims of the projects, the outcomes, I will do something different. I'll try to take a step back, so to say, zoom out, and look at the bigger picture and discourses within which cultural projects like MEM exist and sometimes struggle to work against. So, and what this bigger picture is tells us that more than ever before today, minorities and other migrant populations are connected with multiple successive crises, and they are increasingly seen as threats to social cohesion of communities. So in the next 15 to 20 minutes, I would like to elaborate in more detail on how minorities become connected to problems and why challenging the established notions of threats becomes quite a difficult endeavor for cultural projects. And then towards the end, I will try to discuss broadly the potential that cultural projects could provide to counter the narratives and deeply seated understandings and practices of othering. So, today, we live in the world where there is a very uneasy balance between two competing discourses. On the one hand, we have discourses about justice, and we want to live in a just and inclusive society. And on the other hand, we have discourses about security. And despite numerous attempts that there have been made to promote a more just society, there is nowadays a clearly preoccupation with threats that allegedly stem from multi-ethnic and multicultural composition of states. And as security or discourses about threats come to dominate, particularly minorities emerge as the centers of political uncertainty that evoke a sense of insecurity for the majority of population. Now, maybe, or perhaps many of you have been working with minorities and different migrant populations, and you will say that seeing minorities as a problem is not a new phenomenon, which is quite true. I mean, for centuries there have been different others that existed in society. Religious others, others based on the language spoken. And also then with the formation of nation states, there emerged different national others. But something has changed, especially since the 1990s. And since the 1990s, there has been an increased political and also scholarly interest in the notion of integration and questions of how to integrate minorities into a broader society. And actually, as many scholars have already noted, this very interestingly coincided with the changing notion of security itself. So, while before, security was primarily connected with geopolitical concerns, the security of the state, of a nation state, when the Cold War ended, it changed towards the so-called biopolitical security concerns, which means that the emphasis is nowadays placed more and more on identity groups, or what we could call a human security. This human security operates directly at the level of population. And it calls for a resilience or collective resilience against the undesired others. And what is also quite problematic is that this human security becomes a powerful political mechanism in producing collectives today, symbolically, socially, and politically. And this production of collectives occurs not only by framing certain communities as being under threat and other communities as threatening, but also by establishing and drawing boundaries between different communities. So in most basic terms, human security is about defining who we are, what is our location in the world, and who is not a part of our worlds, basically the irregular and the out of place. And if we think about security or human security in this perspective, it is very much related, or it can be even seen as a fruit of the division of the world into the nation states, as some scholars have highlighted. And the idea that is so really difficult to disentangle ourselves from is that one state belongs to one nation. And if we think about one state and one nation, we can also bring links to other politics called the politics of belonging. One scholar, a feminist scholar, Nero Yuval Davis, named the politics of belonging as, in very basic terms, as the dirty work of boundary maintenance. So in all this security talk about the out-of-placeness, about the irregulars, minorities, of course, emerge as others. But they're not only emerging as others, they're also homogenized very often as potentially disloyal. They're imagined as prone to conflict, secessionism, and seen as fifth columns. And this is also the reason why there's so many different researchers going on about their integration, about their belonging, how they feel, what is their orientation. And this emphasis on human difference that still continues to dominate the political accounts and academic accounts leads very often to the increased vilification of minorities. And the extraordinary circumstances, like, for example, COVID-19 pandemic and now the war in Ukraine, puts a particular gaze on the minority population. So we need to understand how they feel now. And in my research network, we have been pestered by a lot of calls from the media outlets to explain in the context of Germany how Russian speakers feel there, or why there are so many protesting with Russian flags. Are they so disloyal in the context of Germany? And we had to dispel a lot of myths and stereotypes that persisted in the society. So what the problem is and I think what MEM tried to deal against is that minorities are really rarely seen as social actors. And the language of difference continues to dominate the accounts. So the minorities are still the foreigners, and they're different from the majorities and the titular nations, populations. So all these different discourses reproduced in media, reproduced in politics and academia, feeds into the process of what Sara Ahmed has called stranger making. She has published different books on that, conducting research in different institutions. On Being Included has been conducted in the context of the university, or how diversity actually does not really work properly in the institutions that are so outspoken about diversity itself. And the stranger, according to Ahmed, is not just anybody. It is the one whom the political discourses have identified as such. While the stranger, of course, changes with time, it's not like a solid, set-in-stone notion, but it's still something preordained historically, politically. And the stranger is also problematically situated between two standpoints. On the one hand, and I talked already about this, this position is about, or this positions people as the origin of danger, human security. And the other is one that celebrates the origins of their difference, as done by discourses on multiculturalism and diversity, and I will talk about this in a minute. Both discourses, or both standpoints, are tainted. Here we have to also make a remark by colonialism and racism. They're tainted by racialization of off-white blacks, and I mean that whiteness is not everywhere the same, and especially migration and movement disposes how whiteness changes in different contexts. It is tainted by the nesting Orientalism that produce the notion of underdeveloped countries and underdeveloped people. So there are more modern people and there are less modern people. And they're also very much still Eurocentric. And all these discourses are nowadays still so deeply ingrained in our understanding of the world that undoing the stranger figure that Sara Ahmed talks about, a stranger who always lurks as a potential threat, is a truly difficult endeavor. And there have been numerous attempts to challenge those emphasis on differences. For example, in the works of, as I already mentioned, on multiculturalism and diversity. And there are countless documents that have appeared since the early 2000s. For example, the UNESCO formulated the Universal Declaration on Cultural Diversity in 2001, which recognizes cultural diversity as, I quote, common heritage of mankind. And it considers its preservation as an ethical imperative and a part of respect for human dignity. In 2008, European Council or Council of Europe also followed and issued its white paper and called Living Together as Equals in Dignity, hoping that acknowledging cultural diversity could help reduce conflict and division. But surprisingly or not, despite being incorporated in numerous documents, EU level and national, there is still a tendency to highlight difference as an asset, this tendency to highlight difference as an asset is also very widely problematized. And for example, according to Black feminist Bell Hooks, instead of speaking with the people, or these documents or these initiatives are still doing on behalf of people and for the people. And you can actually clearly see that through the formulations of the documents, which still very much objectify the people. And as Bell Hooks writes, there is no need to hear your voice when I can talk about you better than you can speak about yourself. And actually, we're also doing nothing else but speaking about minorities here. In the worst case, trying to invoke positive difference, diversity does not evoke commitment to justice or change. And in the worst case scenario, it actually represents nothing else but a containment strategy, a technique by which liberal multiculturalism manages difference by managing its more troublesome constituents. So, having sketched this broader problematic context that we're currently finding ourselves in, what can cultural work do against the processes of stranger making? Can it do anything? Now, I would have to say that if we want to think about social change that cultural institution and work can bring about, we need to be critically aware of three aspects. First of all, while cultural institutions are seen by different governmental and EU bodies as these beacons of diversity, cultural institutions are not neutral. They are sites of forgetfulness, they are sites of fantasy, particular gaze that could also marginalize people and different minorities. So we are all coming to work with our own backgrounds, with our own upbringing and our ways of understanding the world, and this affects how we structure the approaches towards minorities. Secondly, while cultural institutions are expected to counter global inequalities, they are themselves experiencing exclusions, which are shaped by internal dynamics and laws of its labor market. So it means that cultural workers are experiencing precarious working conditions. They're experiencing lower earnings, long working hours, and a lot of fatigue. And this is something that we also need to take into account when we try to measure the impact of what works and what doesn't work. And beyond this broader context, we also need to consider the wider processes that are simultaneously happen as projects go along. And for the men, this was particularly COVID-19 pandemic that Sajjad already mentioned, and the war in Ukraine. Now, all these experiences underscore the ambivalence of chances for transformative acts. And this also demonstrates how the workers in the project often feel powerless against the current established exclusionary visions. But having said this, and while many cultural institutions continue to unknowingly contribute to this stranger making process. MEM, in my opinion, did manage to bring about certain social change. I'm not talking here about big transformative acts like undoing the boundary between us and them. This is far too difficult. But I'm talking about small transformative acts. And I highlighted three. Sajjad has spoken about some of them through his surveys. The first point, in my opinion, is about fostering new understanding of the social that MEM tried to do through its social media platforms, through its exhibitions, of course, differently in different local contexts. And this understanding of the social is that people should be represented through their multiple struggles for belonging and their changing circumstances of everyday life that go beyond the strangulating boundary between majority and minority. And I think this is also something that has been changing within Cultura Foundation itself, from this focus on integration to the rather idea of belonging and how to talk about belonging. And within this changing context, there is the changing understanding of minority itself, which is emerging more and more as a fluid signifier. It's neither a particular entity or a group, nor a specific social or, even worse, an ethnic category. But it's contextually changing. It is ascribed to people, of course, by political discourses. It is also self-ascribed by people themselves who experience multiple displacements. But minority or this notion can be also renounced by people, or it can be reworked in the attempts to negotiate new emplacements. Another small transformative act is the practice of working with the people that MEM has conducted and finding mediators, and through mediators engaging wider societies. So this is the going against the critique that I have expressed before, that still numerous documents are about on behalf of people or for the people, but not with them. And last but not least, it is about personal and institutional transformations that are taking place. Personal, in terms of the mediators or the participants of the project, Sajjad has also shared their comments, how by engaging the audiences, their own understanding of the world, their own understanding of the surrounding has started to change. And this is the first step in the circle of other changes that might follow or might not, we don't know. And the institutional transformations. And I think this was particularly visible, as I already mentioned, for the Cultura kind of re-evaluation of where we're going and how we're going. And even more than Cultura, I think this is the case that I've been dealing with, a Stalin Russian Museum that has turned the whole conception of its working completely upside down. And while before it was more about speaking on behalf of people and trying to produce the idea of proper Russianness, now they have distorted this image entirely and trying to collect through its laboratory different voices or what it means to be Russian speaker in Estonia. So there is this complex understanding of Russianness that is emerging. Of course, we don't know what further impacts will come out of it, but it is already an impact in itself, that the institution is changing, that the minds of the workers are changing. And last, perhaps last points, it's also about raising awareness of the brick walls, that what are the hindrances, what are the contexts, what are the different opinions of people that exist that are enabling or disabling the project to come further. Now, I've talked a lot. But I will end at this and just maybe add one last sentence, that I try to use this broader context of stranger making to highlight how projects or how MEM project in particular and processes initiated by MEM are never straightforward, and they always have to be considered within the broader contexts, broader circumstances and processes happening around it. Thank you.